All right, this is the most wonderful time of the year for NFL fans. Like Christmas, the NFL draft coming up at the end of the month. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast, everyone. As always, Andy Young with me. We got a doozy today as we get you ready for what the Bills and more around the NFL have in store for the 2025 NFL draft.
A lot of opinions out there, a lot of different directions the Bills could go, and we bring in one of our good buddies who often discusses the NFL draft with us, CBS Sports Chris Trapasso, who writes about the NFL draft and young players in the NFL for CBS Sports. Chris, always great to have you. This time of year, just so much fun as we get closer and closer now, just a couple of weeks away from the draft.
I am absolutely stoked to come on with you guys. I love it every year to dive deep, like Kevin said, not just on Bills prospects, but just to look around the entire NFL to talk about which prospects are rising, falling, and then to weave it back into what that means for the Bills as they have 2 second-rounders this year and 10 total picks. It's a very important draft again for Brandon Beane.
Chris, we like to be timely with this. Your final mock draft coming out yesterday. If I read that correctly, you don't have one more, right?
I do have, so I don't have another 7-rounder or
Final
a multi-round mock draft.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, if they made me do multiple 7-round mock drafts, I would be very upset. So they throw me a bone and only make me do one of those, all 257 picks. I'll have one next week and then one like the day before of the draft. That is my best guess at what happens in round one, and about more than 3/4 of it will ultimately be wrong, and it'll be irrelevant once the draft starts.
That's the fun part about the draft, Chris, is you can dream of certain scenarios, and then when it comes, it ultimately just is what it is. I know, like last year, I don't think we talked about the Bills trading out of the first round.
Yeah.
I don't remember talking about that, and ultimately that's what happened.
Yeah, and they moved back twice, and there were so many receivers available when they had both of those selections in the first round, and they moved all the way out. So that shows that Brandon Beane, the director of analytics, Dennis Locke, and the coaching staff, they have a true board that they will stick to. And if they don't like anyone at pick 30, if they have second-round grades on those players, trading back to even get more picks is not out of the realm of possibility, although it does kind of feel like this is a draft where we'll see the more aggressive Brandon Beane maybe in the first round, or maybe that's from the 4th round into the 3rd where they currently don't have a selection. There's just not 10 to 12 positions available, jobs open, even with more holes on the defensive side than normal on this roster.
Chris, looking at your mock draft, your 7-round draft, Cam Ward, you've got him going to the Titans first overall. Is there a hinge point, a team where this top 10 kind of changes? Is there a specific area where you're like, a team could go a bunch of different ways, and that's going to kind of decide how the rest of the first round dominoes fall?
Yeah, I think somewhere between pick 6 and pick 9. With 6 is the Raiders, 7 is the Jets, and then 9 is the Saints. Those are 2 potential landing spots for Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback from Colorado. Are we going to see Ashton Jeanty go 6, a running back out of Boise State, to help out Geno Smith and that new regime there in Las Vegas? So it's not a lock that any of those teams go in those directions, but I think we'll have a good grasp of the amount of talent left available after those late top 10 selections in this draft.
We see Will Johnson you have going to the Panthers at pick 8. There had been some talk about him potentially falling into the teens, maybe 20s, where the Bills, who likely need a cornerback too, could move up to get a guy like that. Is Will Johnson from Michigan definitely kind of off the table unless they make a massive move up?
So like I said, I still have 2 more mock drafts where I could change things a little bit.
Right.
I had spent multiple mock drafts after talking to some scouts to just try to gauge where the league views him. And they were kind of coming back with the opposite of what I did in this mock, that he could actually be within striking distance for Brandon Beane in the first round.
Interesting.
The tackling was not great in 2024. And then there were like business decisions where he wasn't even trying to make a tackle on a screen play, on an outside run. And then obviously he gets injured and doesn't finish his final season at Michigan. Came into the combine with shorter arms than expected. And there are speed concerns from scouts and even what I saw on film with Will Johnson. So even though I have him number 8 overall here, there is not a guarantee that he's going to be a top 10 pick. He felt like that coming into his final season, but it wouldn't be shocking if he's available into the teens and maybe even into the 20s.
Get deeper into the Bills in just a bit. When Andy and I first sat down and were looking at this mock draft, Travis Hunter to the Browns at pick 2, and I turned to Andy and I was like, that's too bad for that guy because he might just fade away if that's ultimately what happens. He's obviously one of the prize guys of this draft, Chris.
100%. I mean, he is one of the most unique talents that we have ever seen in the NFL draft, and that he was a legitimate two-way player at Colorado. He's the number 1 corner and the number 1 receiver on my board, and just about every other draft analyst that I've talked to in the industry. He is silky smooth. The explosiveness is there. We saw some more nuance to his game running routes as a wide receiver in his final season at Colorado, and he tracks the football as well as anyone in this class. So it'll be fascinating whether it's the Browns or another team inside the top 3 or 5 that ultimately picks Travis Hunter. Where do they play him, and how do his snap counts, how are they divvied up when he's in the NFL? He had the conditioning to be that legit two-way player at Colorado. I wonder if he can maintain that level of conditioning once he gets to the NFL.
Chris, is there a player who you've seen really vault up the draft board? We've seen guys do that from their combine performances or what goes on in the few weeks after that. Is there somebody that really has seen their stock rise over the last few weeks?
Probably Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher from Texas A&M, just from what he did in Indianapolis. It was, to me, a little bit of double counting because he looks crazy athletic on film. So we were all expecting him to test well, but then he has a relative athletic score of perfect 10 out of 10, ran super fast, crazy long arms, almost looks like a big tight end out there playing defensive end. And the film and his production in the SEC is not tremendous. It's not first-round caliber, and I think Shamar Stewart is probably going to be a top 15 or a top 20 selection. Whichever team picks him is going to be banking on development and being able to tap into a lot of upside just based on his length and his athleticism that we saw him show off in Indianapolis.
We talk about defense when we talk about the Bills, and that's where their biggest needs are almost across the board. Cornerback number 2, defensive tackle, edge rusher, safety, Chris. All these possibilities are out there right now in needs for the Bills. Let's just get right into it. Off the top, the first round, I'm looking at your mock draft right here. Andy and I have gone back and forth, whether it's defensive lineman or cornerback. To me, safety's a bit of a stretch there. But ultimately, what do you see the Bills are targeting in the first round with where they're picking?
Well, I think cornerback is their biggest need, even after they re-signed Dane Jackson, and they obviously extended Christian Benford, but the talent at defensive tackle might just be too good for Brandon Beane to pass up. And in this 7-rounder that came out last week, I had them going with Kenneth Grant, the big hulking defensive tackle from Michigan, who didn't work out in Indianapolis, but had a pretty good pro day in Ann Arbor for being 6'3" and over 330 pounds. He's the wide body that they have loved next to Ed Oliver with Daquan Jones and Jordan Phillips and Star Lotulelei. And he, at only 21 years old, has pass rushing upside. I think he can get better once he's in the NFL. Wasn't a crazy pass rusher at Michigan, but I think he can become a good one in Sean McDermott and Bobby Babbage's system. So whether it's corner or defensive tackle, those feel like the two biggest needs, and that there will be those players that deserve to be the 30th overall pick when the Bills go on the clock.
Yeah, on Kenneth Grant, he slots into you, right, as a one technique type of guy, that space eater that also, like you said, had some pass rush ability. What do you see as his biggest strengths and then biggest weaknesses?
The biggest strength is his motor, that usually the 330-pound guys need to take plays off and aren't able to play 60, 70, 80% of the snaps. I think the energy that he showed, the conditioning that he showed next to Mason Graham, his teammate from Michigan, who's going to be a top 5 to top 10 pick, that was what jumped out off the film to me. And the fact that, like I said, at 6'3" and 330 pounds, like we witnessed at his pro day, he's a pretty good athlete for that size. He is not simply a space eater who can't get across a gap or push the pocket up the field. So those are his strengths. His weaknesses, the pass rush move arsenal is not what you want. He doesn't win with his hands a ton. And at that size, you would think he would be like the best run defender in the class that would just stack and shed and devour running backs on a routine basis. He makes plays close to the line of scrimmage, of course, against the run occasionally, but I think he needs to be a little bit more aware and not play as out of control when trying to stop the run.
How about other guys at defensive tackle in those first 2 days, either at 30 or into the second round there where the Bills currently have a couple of picks?
So there's two defensive tackles that I've kind of eyed for what the Bills seemingly want. I'll start with Derek Harmon, and it's just because my pro comparison for him is Daquan Jones. I think they were very similar coming out of Penn State for Daquan Jones and Derek Harmon this season from Oregon. Taller, not 330 pounds, but they play with a wide frame, great run defenders, and give you in spurts the pass rush ability, the pass rushing moves that someone like Kenneth Grant doesn't. So I think Derek Harmon, if he's even within striking distance for Brandon Beane, I could see him trading up for him. And then CJ West from Indiana, another Big Ten defensive tackle, a little bit older, tested very well, and is stocky. He reminds me a lot of Aleem McNeil of the Detroit Lions, who's played that 0-1 technique position very well in Detroit. One of the better run defenders in the class, that he will stack and shed, find the running back on a routine basis, and will not miss a lot of tackles. So he doesn't really have the pass rushing upside of a Kenneth Grant, and he's not as high floor in that regard as Derek Harmon. But if the Bills want a wide body next to Ed Oliver who is going to help the run defense instantly, that would be CJ West, and they can get him in the second round.
How important is it with how the season ends? I mean, we know you have Josh Allen right now. You're in your Super Bowl window. You saw what the Bills' weakness was, getting off the field on 3rd and 4th down. You saw that in the AFC Championship, and then what the Eagles were able to do with their defensive line to slow down Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs' offense. That has to be in the back of the Bills' staff mind looking at this and what they need to do to get over that hurdle.
100%. And we always have that Super Bowl bias. The entire league does that. However, that team, seemingly their blueprint to win the Super Bowl, it's a copycat league. We say it every offseason. And there was nothing more striking in the Super Bowl than how dominant the Eagles were up front against a really good Chiefs offensive line in that game. Outside of the Eagles, the Bills want to rotate their defensive linemen, and at times the Bills have rotated their defensive linemen even more in the Sean McDermott era. They're typically among the league leaders in terms of just how many defensive linemen play more than 30 or 40% of the snaps every season. And I look back to, not saying that corner is not a need. I think it is a top priority if you're just looking at on paper. But with Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson and Josh Norman at times, Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich have been able to get by without premier talents at the cornerback position. And even Christian Benford, who has become one of the best young corners in the league, newly minted Christian Benford, not a big-time athlete. They have a system in the secondary that is very confusing, even for the better quarterbacks in the league, that has gotten great results, pass breakups, interceptions. What I think Sean McDermott would be pounding the table for more than anything else, like you're mentioning, Kevin, is more explosive talent and more depth along the defensive line.
If the Bills were to go corner, we already talked about Will Johnson. Who are some other names out there that fans might want to keep an eye on? We've heard a lot about Trey Amos or Maxwell Hairston. Who are some other guys in that mix at 30 or into the second round?
So Trey Amos, to me, would be the most likely that if we see a run on defensive tackles in this loaded class and Kenneth Grant isn't there. Trey Amos, I don't want to say stylistically he's exactly like Tre'Davious White, but you can see the similarities in that they're SEC corners. I mean, Amos transferred in, but finished his career at Ole Miss. SEC corners with a lot of ball production, tested well. They'll meet the requisite thresholds that I feel like the Bills will have at the cornerback position, athleticism-wise. Pretty good tacklers, just high-floor players that can come in this time-tested scheme and be really good right away. Like you guys are mentioning, the Bills have a wide-open Super Bowl window. I don't know if they're going to be so keen on a developmental type at the cornerback spot, especially after what happened with Kyer Elam. Beyond Trey Amos, Maxwell Hairston is there. He ran, sub 4.3 at the combine, feisty. There are some off-field concerns with him that I think could push him down the board. And then two other names that are coming off injury And on film, I think our first-round caliber players, we just don't know how much the injuries will affect them. Savon Revel from East Carolina and Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame both have man coverage ability, and we saw the Bills try to test out more man coverage down the stretch, and I think they realized they need to run more man coverage, but they both got injured in September and October, respectively, and we just don't know how their health is relative to this point of the pre-draft process or how healthy they will be by the start of the season, but they, too, because of that, could be available in the second round.
This wasn't shocking that Sean McDermott said this, but to hear him come out and say, basically, you got to be a tackler to play for us is something that I think warrants what you talked about earlier with Will Johnson, that they, first and foremost, have to be strong in run support and willing and able to do that.
100%, and that was my biggest concern, and I don't know if Will Johnson just realized that he was going to be a first-round pick, because there were times where he looked away from the running back and just let the blocker push him out of the way, and then when he was diving on those screens or on those outside runs, you just did not like the technique that he was playing with. I think Maxwell Hairston, who is smaller, plays with a lot of feistiness and plays bigger. Trey Amos is a great tackler. Revel from East Carolina, even though he didn't play the level of competition that you would like to see, also a very good tackler. One other corner, Darian Porter from Iowa State, who tested through the roof and would be the most explosive and fastest corner that Sean McDermott's ever had in Buffalo. Not a great tackler. So I wonder if those are going to be disqualifiers for some of these round 2, round 3 corners if the Bills ultimately go defensive line in the first round.
Chris, you do have Darian Porter going to the Bills in the second round. Do you think that then is a valuable pick at where they're picking right there?
Yeah, I mean, it's more about value at that point, that no prospect is perfect. And I just mentioned that there are tackling concerns with Porter. I just wonder if late in the season, and we saw it in the AFC title game, the Bills' inability to play man coverage, and that we saw an uptick in that percentage use of that coverage for the Bills, if they really are going to, I don't want to say switch philosophies totally, but change and say we need a big-bodied specimen that can run with the team's number 1 receiver, where we don't only have to play zone. Early in the Sean McDermott era, the Bills were always near the top of the NFL strictly in zone coverage. With Darian Porter at 6'3", 200 pounds, 33-inch arms, very long arms, with a crazy workout in Indianapolis, he would be the consummate project-y type, but has all-pro upside in this Bills scheme because, again, the Bills have just not had a cornerback with his level of explosiveness, speed, or length in the Sean McDermott era.
And then you go with edge rusher with the second pick in the second round, and to me, that really nails the Bills' 3 biggest needs on the first 2 days.
Yeah, absolutely. And Donovan Izaraku from Boston College kind of is in the mold of Javon Solomon. And we had seen for the first 5 or 6 years in the Sean McDermott era, the Bills liked size and length and power along their defensive line, especially on the edges. Boogie Basham didn't work out. AJ Epinesa, they re-signed him, but has never really emerged as a former second rounder. It's really Greg Rousseau, and they had Von Miller. So they were a team that has started to gravitate toward a smaller rusher. That's what they would get with Donovan Izaraku, who has long arms like Javon Solomon, had a ton of sacks last season, and everything that I've gathered and read about his leadership and the culture fit feels exactly like what Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane would like. Not going to be very big, not going to be a pure run stopper setting the edge on first and second down, but has a very refined pass rush move arsenal and can be really good and bendy around the corner.
Chris, for years we've heard from the Bills, we've heard from analysts that sacks aren't the be-all, end-all of pass rushing, that it's important to get pressures and get the quarterback off his spot and all those things. At the same time, there's that segment of observers, of fans who say, that's great, but at some point you got to get home and make the big play. How much of what you saw the Bills do in the offseason, bringing in a Bosa, bringing in a chess piece, although he's suspended, and a guy like Michael Hoyt, and then potentially in the draft, could aim to get more out of that in terms of just getting home, not just creating pressure, but getting home to make the big play?
100%. I mean, in both of the Bills' AFC title games against the Chiefs, they were able to pressure Mahomes, but I don't know if they sacked him in either one of those games. And think back to 2020, that was the problem at the end of the career for Jerry Hughes, where he was a big-time pressure guy, not a high sack guy. And you get the production out of the disruption, but you're right that in those key games against the best quarterbacks who are going to get the ball out quickly, you need to be able to sack them to get it to 3rd and 15 and 3rd and 18, things like that. So I think with Joey Bosa and Hoyt and even Larry Ogunjobi on the inside, the Bills want more explosiveness to be able to win in the first 2.5 seconds of the play before the quarterback is getting rid of the football. So that's a great point. I think the Bills realize, yeah, we can generate pressure. We can create turnovers. We need to get the quarterback on the ground more. And you get that typically with the better athletes either on the inside or around the corner at the edge rusher spot.
It seemed like that to me throughout the entire season, Chris, that they were always this close to getting to the quarterback. So the pressure was there. The finish, as a fan or as someone watching the game, just got frustrating as the season rolled along that they were just never able to get home, it seemed.
And maybe this is too simple, and I could be using kind of a draft analyst bias here, but it's everything what I just mentioned. I think that's why we ultimately saw that a lot with the Bills, that A.J. Epinesa did not test very well coming out of Iowa for the edge rusher spot. Daquan Jones, this late in his career, not a great athlete at defensive tackle. Rousseau even did not test particularly well, even though he's big and towering at the defensive end spot. And Von Miller, at this point of his career, was not as explosive and bendy as he was even in 2022 when he started that season as like a defensive player of the year candidate in Buffalo. So to Andy's point earlier, I think with Bosa and Hoyt and Ogunjobi, and likely what I think they'll do in this draft, I think we are going to see better athletes who will be able to finish those plays in the regular season to get the Bills to double-digit wins. And then in the playoffs when they're going to face probably a really difficult stretch of high-caliber quarterbacks in the AFC.
You'll find a bunch of people out there that are listening to this and listening to radio and reading articles that are saying, defense, schmefense, right? Give me the offense. And a lot of people still out there.
That's me.
That's you, former wide receiver. Wide receiver is going to be a big talk again because of the departures that they've had. They don't still have that number one guy. What do you think about them taking a receiver early in this draft?
I don't think they'll do it with one of those first 3 picks and then they don't have a selection in round 3. But as early as round 4, it's like pick 105, 106, somewhere in that range early in round 4, I would be completely fine with the Bills doing that. Now, I'll say in any draft, there's not a lot of future number ones that you feel great about on the 3rd day of the draft, but you can get a niche type player. And we've seen the Bills visits at wide receiver. That's the position that they visited with more than any other, even more than corner and D tackle. They have brought in the Isaiah Bonds, the Arian Smith from Georgia, the really fast wide receivers. And we've heard Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane speak to that need for speed at the wide receiver spot. There are a lot of those wide receivers in this class, 4th, 5th, 6th round, that I think they absolutely should pick one of those players. Even Dante Thornton, who I had in my mock draft from Tennessee, tall, ran in the low 4.3s. I would like to have a player where the Bills aren't going to ask him to do a variety of things, run intricate routes, create after the catch, but be able to tap into Josh Allen's arm strength and hit more plays over the top of the defense. Beyond what that can do just for scoring touchdowns and creating the big play, it would really open up Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid and Khalil Shakir in the underneath and intermediate portions of the field.
Dovetail off the draft for just a second because you study the young players too. You know the Bills inside and out. Is there more that they can get out of Keon Coleman? Like, they've talked so much about how they were disappointed when he came back from injury and thought he was on an ascension leading into that injury. But is there more of a player there than what we saw last season, even in his highest moments?
There can be if the Bills move him into the slot. I mean, you look at all the analytics that are out there today with the tracking data that's available. He was like at the bottom of the league in terms of separation. And that was the problem with him at Florida State. He made some circus catches for the Seminoles, but that's really not a sticky stat in terms of going from the draft to the NFL, that guys that are great in contested catch situations aren't always great. And usually it will fluctuate a lot in terms of that win rate in traffic. So I think in the slot where there's more room, there's more space, he can still run some vertical routes. Where we saw him make some plays like in the Seahawks game and in the Colts game, that feels like where he will have to ultimately play instead of dealing with the bigger, longer corners on the perimeter and then that extra defender. which is sideline. That's really a problem for Keon Coleman. That was the problem for him at Florida State, and I think he needs to be that big slot receiver. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's where I think they can get the most out of him in the NFL.
So then how does that jive then with Khalil Shakir, who was fantastic in the slot, and you just signed to a 4-year extension? You don't usually play a bunch of those guys. Can they be on the field at the same time? Is there the ability of Shakir to move outside?
Great question. I think they can, because Joe Brady is so diverse with his personnel sets that it's not the classic one wide receiver standing near the sideline, another one opposite him, and then only one slot receiver. They use trips, they use stack bunches a lot where you don't necessarily have that classic look. So it would probably take more of Joe Brady's creativity to keep both of those receivers on the field. You even have Curtis Samuel that is predominantly a slot receiver, although early in his career in Carolina did win and show the ability to win on the outside. I think with Shakir and Coleman, the reason that you could keep them on the field, even if they're both inside or just reduced closer to the formation, they're going to run different routes. Shakir is going to be your Cole Beasley underneath guy, occasionally work the intermediate level. I think with Coleman and the basketball background and the rebounding, he can run more vertical routes. I just want him in this slot where there's more space. And again, he doesn't have to deal with that second corner being the sideline.
All right. Running back, James Cook. We all know the storyline going on there with the Bills and James Cook. Important to get another running back in this draft. We know, Andy and I talk often, it seems like whatever the Bills find in the draft at running back seems to have some level of success since, Devin Singletary arrived to some point. But, James Cook had the year he had, but the future kind of looks a little murky.
It certainly does. And I wouldn't hate the Bills going with the contingency plan like on the third day of the draft in this really deep running back group. But with James Cook this season, Ray Davis, and Ty Johnson, it feels like it would be hard for the Bills to have room for a rookie running back. I mentioned it at the outset of this. With 10 picks, it's really hard to say, hey, yeah, there's 10 jobs open, so let's make the 10 selections like they did last year. So for as much as a draft analyst, I would say absolutely pick a running back because it is as deep of a class as I've scouted in the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer than that. But in the same token, I would say it would be maybe hard for that guy to ultimately make the team. Ty Johnson has been so valuable, and they just spent a 4th rounder on Ray Davis. So it'll be kind of a juggling act, and we'll maybe go back to Brandon Beane's board to see who do they have in the 5th or 6th round. If there's a surefire running back that's ahead of everyone else, I'd be fine with it. But then might be a difficult task for him to make the roster. And the last thing you would want is to draft him, even though it would be a 6th rounder, and then stash him on the practice squad to then just get poached by another team.
Which brings up the interesting idea of trading James Cook now or on draft night, and with the idea that, hey, we're going to draft somebody else. I necessarily wouldn't want to play with that kind of fire. Like when you're in this Super Bowl window and you have James Cook, who was clearly your second best offensive option next to Josh Allen last season and did so well, maybe I don't want to pay him $15 million, but I also don't think I want to trade him right now.
No, totally. I don't think the Bills are in that situation based on everything that you just laid out, the Super Bowl window, and really how much development he made in year 3. We didn't see the fumbling issue. I thought he was better after contact than he's ever been from Georgia all the way to the NFL in his first 2 seasons in Buffalo. And everything that we heard, even during broadcast, that whether it was CBS or Fox saying that when they would talk to Sean McDermott, and I'm sure you guys talked to him during the week as well, they were always very complimentary of how he was just a head down, hard worker, even more so than he had been earlier in his career. Obviously tied the Bills rushing touchdown record last season. So I don't think they should go into the draft thinking we're going to draft a 4th round running back and just have it be where we're going to trade James Cook. But I don't think they should be totally opposed to if a team calls them in the second day of the draft to say absolutely not. There's no way we're trading James Cook. Just again, looking for the future and kind of balancing with how much money he's ultimately going to want. And he really has not budged apparently from that $15 to $16 million price tag.
All right, Chris, real quick before we go, we'll move on from the Bills. Let's talk a little bit about Sean Dolak, University of Buffalo. Incredible year, did not go to the Combine. but tested really well on UB's pro day. Where do you see him kind of fall as we get into the draft here?
Still third day of the draft because he doesn't necessarily play as fast as his workout. But even before the combine, before the pro day, I was like, it's all going to depend whether he gets drafted on how well he works out. And that for as much as I can say he doesn't look that fast on film or explosive, the numbers are the numbers. He had a 35-inch vertical, did not run particularly slow, ran somewhere, I believe, in the 4.6s or high 4.5s.
Mm-hmm.
So he certainly has, in terms of just the numbers on paper, a profile that is draftable. And then you watch the film and you see all of the fundamentals and the refined skill in coverage. We saw the interceptions and the returns for touchdowns, the tackling reliability. He barely missed a tackle last season, it felt like. And he has really good instincts that he can read plays in a hurry. So in what is a pretty thin linebacker class, I would be very surprised if Sean Dolak ultimately is not drafted. I think he'll go somewhere middle to late portions of day 3.
It's interesting because I think, Chris, you and I were texting back in February, pre-combine. I was asking you about Sean Dolak, and he's going to draw the comparisons to Joe Andreessen, who that story worked out famously, but they're not the exact same player and have different traits, no doubt about that, right?
Definitely. So they're on the polar end of the spectrum of each other when it comes to the draft, and that I didn't really love Joe Andreessen's film. I watched him last year at UB, and then watching everything that transpired at the pro day last season for the Bulls, he tested through the roof. He was that raw, high upside linebacker that had like elite level athleticism for the linebacker spot by today's NFL standards. And I think right away at that rookie minicamp, I think the Bills saw that instantly and said, look, this guy's not ready to play right away, but we have a moldable ball of clay. With Dolak, you kind of get the opposite. I don't think he's quite as athletic as the workout, but everything that you want out of the linebacker spot, he already has that in spades. He was very experienced there, of course, and in coverage and against the run, even as a blitzer, he's further ahead in terms of the nuances of the game than Andreessen was a year ago.
All right, let's do a little 3 and out, and we'll wrap this thing up.
Let's do it.
Chris, to you, what's been the biggest storyline in the NFL this offseason?
I don't want to say Aaron Rodgers because that's what he would want to say.
Okay, that's where I was going with it, because Aaron Rodgers just pops into your mind right away, but I don't want to say Aaron Rodgers.
It's, I guess, the underwhelming quarterback market, both veteran market and in the draft, that we normally have one or the other that's pretty intriguing. And this year, the quarterback class, we didn't really talk about him a lot, which is fine, but not a very good quarterback class at the top. There's not a lot of depth. There's not 3 or 4 sleepers that people are really excited about. And then for the Giants to sign Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, and that's like their answer at the quarterback spot. The Steelers re-signed Mason Rudolph. Like, is that their answer, or is it going to be 40-something-year-old Aaron Rodgers? We don't know what the Browns are going to do. They have Kenny Pickett. It's a very interesting offseason and a rare offseason where both the draft class and the free agent and trade market at the quarterback spot have been really bland and are just unexciting.
I like it.
I found it interesting that guys like Myles Garrett and Max Crosby, these guys who said, all right, we're going to seek trades and all these things, end up just going back to their same teams. And like, they got
now
paid,
we're seeing
right?
it with TJ Watt.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of interesting that there was this big hullabaloo about all this movement, and then there really wasn't.
Following the Masters, Chris, Masters pick, I got Scotty Scheffler and Shane Lowry, my top 2 guys.
I'm going to go Oberg. I love his swing. I love how fast he plays. And he just seems unshaken by any big moment. I know we haven't seen him win that big tournament yet, but this could be the weekend. A great ball striker, pretty good around the greens. I could see Oberg winning this Masters in 2025.
I like it.
It's hard to pick against Scheffler, but it's also hard to win 3 Masters in 4 years. Maybe somebody like JT, Justin Thomas, makes that rise. You know, I don't know. He hasn't been playing great, but
what about Rory this year?
Yeah, Rory would be a fantastic story.
I always go Brooks Koepka when it comes to the majors. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Lately, it hasn't really been working out, but I'll stick with Scheffler on this. All right, last one. We were talking about this beforehand. Val Kilmer passed away in the middle of last week. A lot of talk about his best films, his best work. I will just say, as a Val Kilmer fan, that Tombstone is his best work ever. So we'll go with the number 2 pick. I know you guys aren't huge Val Kilmer guys, but I would go with The Doors. He really captured Jim Morrison. Watched that recently after he passed away. Just nailed it. Remembered it as a kid. Just watched it the other day, Chris.
So as a 90s kid, I would say he was a really good Batman. I mean, we've had so many different Batmans. I thought he was better than Michael Keaton in that he was serious. He had that superhero presence on film. And that's like the main movie that I think Andy and I both remember him for. I know he was obviously in Top Gun too. But I think he was one of the better Batmans, that he was in a couple of those movies in the 90s and did a really good job as serious, kind of solemn Batman.
I liked him as Jim Morrison in The Doors. My dad was a huge Doors fan, so I thought that was cool. Used to watch that on VH1 all the time after it came out. And then obviously, being a 90s kid like Chris, Batman, for sure.
All right. That's fair enough. Batman honestly never even crossed my mind, just because Christian Bale was so good, but we don't need to get into Batman talk either. All right, the NFL draft just a few weeks away at this point. Chris, as always, thanks for coming on and joining us.
Yeah, Chris, give a little plug for your social media where viewers and listeners can find your work.
Chris Trapasso on Twitter, X, and TikTok, and CBS Sports. Just Google my name at CBS Sports. The first result that will pop up is my writing archive. I'm doing a lot of prospect evaluations leading into the draft, but I am still writing articles. My Trust the Traits prospect list, my Trust the Tape, 2 totally different prospects, just a group that I like to, and an article series that I like to do every year. So I'll still have articles coming out until the draft. And then day 2 of the draft, rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5, I'll be doing the real-time NFL draft tracker for CBS Sports, where I'm just giving a grade and an evaluation for all the picks.
Man, we've got to be pushing like a decade here of having Chris involved with our Spectrum News product in one way or another.
I think so.
Yeah, we love having you, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks again,
I really
Chris.
appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thanks.